Argument structure, global coherence. Oftentimes, when we look at the shape of an argument, we describe it as an hourglass shape, meaning that we start more generally, we gradually get more specific in the body of the paper, and then we gradually move back out to more general. But it's important to realize that that is a simplification. The reality is more complex. And what I would suggest is that, in fact, that shape gets replicated, especially the top part of the hourglass gets replicated repeatedly through a paper. So it's not that you just begin and get more specific, it's that you're constantly doing that. You begin with something more general and get more specific at different levels within the paper. So here I'm imagining sections where the beginning of the section is more general and then it gets more specific. And then you start in the next section and it's more general and gets more specific. And then you begin the next section and it's more general and gets more specific. But in fact, even within the sections, we see the same thing happening at the level of paragraphs, where paragraphs begin more generally and get more specific by the end of each paragraph. So it's more contoured than what is usually described. Now, I'm going to describe this in a different way, though, and I'm going to look at points. Here I'm using points in a very technical sense. A point is a sentence. It's an identifiable sentence. We can point to points in a paper. Arguments are organized around points. To begin with, there's the main point, which is what we call the thesis. The main point of the paper is that single sentence that we would want readers to remember, right? So if they remember nothing else from our paper, that's what we want them to remember, is that single sentence. Now, in fact, it's going to occur twice in the paper, right at the beginning in the introduction and right at the end in the conclusion. It's not going to be exactly the same sentence because by the time they get to the conclusion, the readers will have more terminology at their disposal, more background, and so we as writers can write that sentence differently. But the proposition that the sentences represent should be the same in the introduction and in the conclusion. The main point of a paper is the thesis. So if we think of it as a structure, like imagine a pavilion, the purpose of the pavilion is to keep rain and sun off of us. So that main point is the purpose of the paper. That's why the pavilion exists. The thesis should be a single sentence that clearly states what the writer wants the reader to take away from the paper. Readers expect to find the thesis near the beginning of the paper in the introduction and near the end of the paper in the conclusion. But of course, that's only part of the structure. We also have sections, and each section will have a section point. That's what we want the readers to take away from the section. Now here I arbitrarily chose 3 sections. You have the number of sections necessary to support your main point. It may be 1 section, it may be 5 sections. It doesn't matter as long as it's sufficient for your purposes and to convince your reader that your main point is valid. Each section should be there to support the thesis, the main point. So again, if we think of our pavilion, those sections are like the pillars that support the roof, the main point of the pavilion. Readers look for the point of the section towards the beginning of the section in that very first paragraph. A section point should be one clear, concise sentence. Okay, so now we've got our main points supported by section points. But of course, that's not the whole story because there's also paragraphs within each section. And each paragraph has a main point to it as well. And those points within each paragraph support the section that they belong to. And again, I arbitrarily chose 3 paragraphs per section. again, you have the number of paragraphs sufficient to make your argument, to support the point of the section. Each paragraph of a section is there to support the main point of the section. So again, thinking about our pavilion, those paragraphs are like the foundation of the pavilion. They're there to support the pillars, the sections, and the pillars are there to support the roof, the thesis. Again, readers want to easily find the main point of each paragraph in a single clear sentence. So each paragraph, you should be able to point to the point of that paragraph, and readers should be able to easily find it. When we look at paragraphs, the main point of each paragraph is supported by the other sentences in the paragraph. We start with a transition. That's optional but common. The transition could be an entire sentence. The idea is that it moves you from one paragraph to the next. It could be a phrase, could be an entire sentence. Then we get the point sentence. Generally, that's going to be the first or second sentence of the paragraph. In rare situations, you might want to have it at the bottom of the paragraph, but never in the middle of the paragraph. And the reason for that is because readers will never identify that as the point of the paragraph. They're going to, by default, look for it in the beginning of the paragraph, and if they don't find it there, they're going to look for it at the bottom of the paragraph. But they will be very confused if your point is somewhere buried in the middle. All right, now, each point sentence also needs to be supported. Just as we were talking about the point of a paper needs to be supported by section points, and section points need to be supported by paragraph points, we also need support for paragraph points. But now we're moving to a level below a point sentence. Now we're looking at reasons and evidence. The reasons are why a reader should accept the point of the paragraph. It's the support of it. But reasons need support as well, which brings us to evidence. These each could be separate sentences within the paragraph, or you could imagine a situation where one reason is supported by evidence all in a single sentence. And again, I arbitrarily chose 2 pieces of evidence per reason and 2 reasons per point sentence in a paragraph. That's arbitrary. You need the number of reasons necessary, sufficient to support the point sentence, and the amount of evidence necessary to support the reason. The purpose of this whole talk really is to see how readers are going to approach an argument paper. These are their expectations, that they're going to find the thesis at the beginning of the paper and the end of the paper, that they're going to find sections supporting that thesis, and each section will have a point sentence that states clearly what the point of that section is. And each section will consist of paragraphs, and each paragraph will have a point that supports the section point. And each paragraph has reasons and evidence to support the paragraph point. And the idea is that if it's well organized this way, a reader can easily figure out what the argument is just by skimming. And you can observe this for yourself. Find a paper that you think is really well done, and I bet that you can just skim through there and identify all of the points throughout. You can find the thesis right there at the beginning, right there at the end. You can find the section points. You can find the paragraph points, and you don't have to read the entire paper. You can just skim through there and find each point and know what the gist of the argument is. And if we do this right, we end up with a nice structure, and never lose sight of the purpose of why we're building this structure. In the end, we're trying to convince our readers that our main point is valid.